to another edition of the Rita Panahi Show Overtime. We're back. I was filling in for Peter Credlin there for a couple of weeks, but she's back and so is Overtime. Coming up today, we'll get the latest from the US with Josh Hammer as Joe Biden seeks to gaslight the nation with his Bidenomics agenda. We'll be speaking to Malcolm Clark about children being transitioned with a focus on Jazz Jennings. And the latest royal news with the always sassy Kinsey Schofield. And we have plenty of lefties losing it for you this week. But first, as always, we start the show with the latest news headlines. Let's bring in Sophie Ellsworth. Sophie, let's start with one of your pieces. You wrote for The Australian that Sky News Australia has begun legal action against RMIT Fact Lab, demanding the retraction of false fact-checking verdicts on the TV channel's online content and reimbursement for lost revenues. It follows a comprehensive report on the saga in the Fact Check Files by Jack Horton, which prompted Meta to suspend its fact-checking partnership with RMIT. Tell me the latest here, Sophie.
So, Rita, basically Sky News has issued legal letters to the RMIT University, basically saying to them that their conduct is pretty appalling and that they need to remove the fact checks that they have online. They need to also, because they're saying Sky News content is false, which it is not. And they're also asking for revenue to be paid to them as lost revenue as a result of these fact checks labels that stop the Sky content from being viewed. Because not forgetting, Rita, the RMIT Fact Lab did not have certification for fact-checking when they were making all these claims about Sky's content.
Well, I mean, the certification is one thing. To me, of far greater concern is just the blatant left-wing activism masquerading as a fact check.
Right.
They're not even artful about it. It was so blatant that even Facebook had a look at what was happening and said, we're suspending this relationship and having a look into it. So let's hope that suspension is permanent, because this is election interference. When you are suppressing legitimate stories, where you are putting these false fact checks so people don't see them, then the numbers get suppressed on social media where so many people get their news, then you're actually having a really sinister influence on an electoral process.
That's right, Rita. And Jack Houghton has exposed this for all it is and shown that the fact checkers themselves, even Russell Skelton, the director, they've tweeted or retweeted at the very least, very left-leaning tweets.
Pro-voice.
They're pro-voice, and this is a problem.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you may find certain personalities who can separate their own ideology from the job. But sadly, increasingly in media, that's becoming difficult to see, because the lines between opinion and news are being completely blurred. We're talking opinions here. We're telling people what we think, and it's very clear indeed. And sticking with the fact-checking theme, the Daily Mail has revealed the BBC's disinformation correspondent faces allegations of lying on her CV. 27-year-old Mariana Sprigg has been accused of falsely claiming to have worked with a respected BBC journalist in order to seek freelance work in Moscow. This was around 5 years ago. She was caught out, apparently, Sophie, so she didn't get the job. But this is someone who supposedly rails against disinformation. It's a bit of a hypocrisy at play.
Rita, these things always catch up with you. Why would you lie on your CV? This is going to come unstuck, and it has now. But it's really important to point this out, particularly because of this lady's job, where she's supposedly stamping out disinformation, whereas she's actually telling people stuff that isn't even true.
And not surprisingly, also some accusations of her being essentially a lefty who's using the role to push a left-wing agenda. Now to the race-based referendum, and the Daily Telly reports that new polling shows that despite being the biggest political advertising spender on Facebook and Instagram in Australia, almost 1 in 3 voters don't rate any of the Yes campaign's arguments as compelling reasons to vote for The Voice. This is really interesting because it shows two things. Firstly, it shows the enormous war chest that the Yes camp has. They're their biggest advertiser, political advertiser in Australia. And I know that, you know, they've got this enormous amount of money, reportedly $100 million to spend in a fairly short period of time. So that's why you're being bombarded with yes messaging, and they can spend that money across the country, whilst the No campaign is far more limited. That they don't have that money, so they can't be putting these ads on Melbourne and Sydney television constantly. They're concentrating on the smaller states where it's a little bit cheaper, Tasmania and South Australia. But the second point that's interesting is that it ain't working. They're not resonating. Whatever they're selling, the Australian people aren't buying.
That's right, Rita. And there's a lot of people out there who are not wearing yes shirts, who are not wearing yes badges. They don't have yes posters on the front of their homes. There's a real undercurrent in society of people who are very, very quiet. And I think that is very concerning to the Yes campaign. And I think also, Rita, this is a David and Goliath battle. This is the little guys versus the big corporate giants and the elites in this country. And people don't like being talked down to. I think this has been a real issue in this campaign, particularly when Anthony Albanese aligned himself with Alan Joyce, the Qantas CEO, and then we know how that's all unfolded into an absolute disaster. So I think the No camp shouldn't rest easy yet. However, like you say, the Yes camp has a lot of cash.
Oh, they'd have a lot of cash indeed. We haven't seen anything like it really in this country, that amount of money being spent in such a short period of time, and also this mismatch of resources between the two sides. But like you said, it's a David and Goliath battle, and David is winning at the moment. It's not over yet. Now, brave detransitioner Chloe Cole, who in July told Congress her childhood was ruined by gender reassignment therapy, took to X, formerly Twitter, to reveal that Meta considers her Instagram bio to be too violent. Sophie, I would have thought performing a double mastectomy on a healthy teenager, she was only 15 years old when they did that procedure, that was far more violent than her recounting her experiences on her own social media platforms. I mean, this sort of censorship seems to be very odd indeed from Meta.
She's just explaining, Rita, what she went through. I don't think there's any issue with that. I mean, it's pretty full on. Well, any of us would agree, I'm sure, that it's very intense what this woman went through, and she's explaining it on social media. So this is absolutely a form of censorship, and that is frightening.
It is, and we've spoken to Chloe Cole on this program, and her story is really an important one. I think she's saving lives. She's going to be saving a lot of confused kids from making the sort of mistakes she's made, and they're irreversible in her case. She's only still a teenager, but she fears she's sterile from the treatments she's had. She's had her breasts removed. She's got all sorts of lifelong medical issues that she has to grapple with now. So this is...
It's good that she's pointing this out though, Rita, so people are aware and they've realised the dangers, because she's come out of the other side.
Still a teenager.
Exactly. A very sad situation.
And was put on, I think, fairly powerful hormones at 13 and double mastectomy at 15. Just think about that. Crazy. Now, let's go to President Joe Biden, who's had yet another incoherent press conference. This one was so bad that his handlers moved in to cut the question and answer session short. Speaking in Hanoi, the president, well, he was confused.
Look, nobody likes having celebrated international meetings if you don't know what you want at the meeting, if you don't have a game plan. He may have a game plan. He just hasn't shared it with me. But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
Look, he wants to lie down, and I think we're all on board with that. I think he needs a lie down. But when he's speaking in full sentences, he says dumb stuff like this.
And the only existential threat humanity faces, even more frightening than a nuclear war, is global warming going above 1.5 degrees in the next 10 years. And we're in real trouble. There's no way back from that.
What do you think about that we've got to be far more worried about global warming being the end of the world than nuclear war?
Rita, this whole performance by Joe Biden, I will say, is an utter embarrassment to America. I actually am at the point now where I almost can't watch this anymore. It's just so demoralising.
Don't say that, because I've got a Biden extravaganza
yes, we want
coming
the viewers
up later.
To tune into the Biden extravaganza.
So you need to watch
Absolutely do. But Rita, I just want to get that surely someone should just get that microphone and save him from these embarrassing situations where he makes no sense. He speaks in riddles. How on earth is this man running the country?
Well, yeah, as someone said, you know, is he running the country or is the person who controls his teleprompter running the country? But yeah, we do have a Biden extravaganza coming up later in the hour. Sophie Vice President Kamala Harris ain't much better. She's been mocked for being cringe after a video went viral of her dancing. I think this is what this is called, dancing at a White House hip-hop party. I'm lost for words. Stop. There will be no more of that. You're not going to... anyone replays that clip again, they're sacked. I'm saying it here right now.
Why, Rita?
Because you could only watch that once before the cringe becomes too much. And you just, like Joe Biden, you need to just go away and have a lie down.
But Rita, I would argue that her hip-hop is probably better than her political manoeuvring. And look, if someone put a camera in front of you or I, would we look that great dancing? I'm going to cut a bit of slack here, Rita.
No,
I didn't think that was that bad.
Oh,
it was entertaining.
Sophie Ellsworth.
It was entertaining.
Are you blind?
I say more of it.
Did you see what I saw? Did you? Are you seeing
Do not
something else?
censor that content.
No, I am censoring it. No one is allowed to play it ever again. It needs to just be disappeared.
Rachel.
Yeah, I'm pulling my own fact check on that. Cringe. I'm marking it cringe, never to be seen again. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. No! Oh, let's start with a little Disney depravity. Here is Minnie Mouse twerking in front of children.
Make that ass. Make that ass. Yes, indeed. Not gonna put Minnie Mouse in.
God, what can you say about that? Talking about depravity, let's have a look at this lefty losing it. Here is Constantine Anthony. He's the mayor of Burbank, California. He's being spanked here by a drag queen at a Democrat campaign event on the weekend. And guess what, Soph? That Democrat campaign event was promoted for ages 15 and up. Charming stuff right there.
Rita, even if it's a drag queen or not, spanking someone like that, the mayor, call me a prude.
And it's a big city.
I think it's inappropriate, Rita. Can't they do that thing in their own home?
Well, they could, but then it wouldn't be a Democrat campaign event then, would it? Now, let's go to Sports Centre, who played this heartwarming footage of US Open champion Coco Gauff, but they seem a tad confused about what's happening now. This is how they described that scene. They said she took a moment to soak it all in after winning her first Grand Slam event. Now, so I may be an atheist, but even I can tell that lady was praying, possibly giving thanks for this wonderful win. Are they too scared to even say the P word in a tweet?
Probably, Rita. I think you've picked up on this really well, where they are actually missing the whole point of what she was doing there.
If you're going to highlight it, if you're going to cut up a clip and put that up, at least say what's happening. Now, this is the opposite of a lefty losing it. It's an 11-year-old Alabama boy, Chris, who shot a home intruder and then mocked him for crying.
Someone had broken into his house. Scared, Chris grabbed a 9mm handgun.
When he was coming downstairs and told me he was going to kill me and F you, all that.
The intruder made it out the front door with a hamper in hand. That's when Chris started firing off bullets. As the intruder was to jump this fence, Chris's 12th and final shot hit the bad guy in the leg.
I shot through a hamper that he was carrying, and it was a full metal jacket bullet. I went straight through the bag and hit him in his leg. Wow. And he started crying like a little baby.
A baby that learned his lesson.
When I pulled the gun out on him, I guess he didn't think it was a real gun because he didn't worry about it. He just kept on walking.
I got to say, I love an Alabama accent. Isn't that great? I could listen to that boy talk all day. Now, let's go for a trip down memory lane to a lefty who has well and truly lost it. The question is, was Sean Penn always this loopy, or did COVID break his brain?
You can't go around pointing a gun in somebody's face, which is what it is when people are unvaccinated.
I have personally very little tolerance with those who don't exercise that common sense courtesy. They have to look at their lifestyle. I would like to see if we could just come up with an American mask to wear for the next 6 to 12 months.
At this point, it seems criminal to me, actually. Someone chooses not to be vaccinated, that they should choose to stay home, not go to work, not have a job.
I believe that everyone should get vaccinated. I believe it should be mandatory, like turning your headlights on in a car at night. So I'll go back to gaslit when I can be assured that 100% of the crew has gotten vaccinated. I would request that only vaccinated audiences have an opportunity to see this. Eventually it will stream. And that's a better time for the unvaccinated to see it. I hope that audiences are drawn to it. Specifically, I hope that vaccinated audiences are drawn to it.
Now, it may be tempting to think that COVID is what broke Sean's tiny little brain, but he has long been a lefty losing it. Remember, he cozied up to Hugo Chavez, even joining the campaign trail for the man who did so much to destroy Venezuela with his insane socialist policies. You remember, they turned that once prosperous South American nation to an impoverished hellhole where the citizens have been reduced to eating zoo animals. So, Sean Penn, lefty losing it recently or lifelong lefty losing it?
I'd say longer than recently, but Rita, he should stick to making movies. How's that for a suggestion?
Well, some of those movies have also left a lot to be desired, so yeah. But I love how he's specifying which audiences should be seeing his movies and when. So, you know, the unvaccinated can stream it at some point and the vaccinated could go to the movies. I mean, give me a break. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Rita.
In recent days, we've had a glimpse into the weekend at Bernie's routine that the Biden White House has been running with. We really don't know who is calling the shot, who is the most powerful man in the world, who is commander-in-chief, because it ain't this guy.
And, I see. I'm just following my orders here.
He's just following orders, folks. That was the president on Sunday in Vietnam during a press conference. And as always, the president has a cheat sheet with the questions he's likely to be asked and the names of those likely to ask it. And he still manages to stuff it up. And nowadays, his staff don't even let him finish before they abruptly end a press conference. Have a look at this.
Had access to change it, had access. It wasn't confrontational at all. He came with me.
Thank you, everybody. This ends the press conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you bringing U.S. strategic interests above the rights here in Vietnam?
Joe Biden is the oldest US president, so why is he being treated like a baby? Peter Ducey asked that salient question, and Karine Jean-Pierre really didn't have a good answer.
President Biden is the oldest president in U.S. history. Why does White House staff treat him like a baby?
No one treats the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, like a baby.
So there's this book that says
That's ridiculous.
When staff
That's a
walked
ridiculous
back
claim.
what sounded like a call for regime change in Russia, the president, quote, rather than owning his failure, he fumed to friends about how he was treated like a toddler. Was John Kennedy ever babied like that?
So look, I'll say this. There's going to be a range, always a range of books that are about every administration, as you know.
You have to laugh, don't you? Yes, there are a range of books on any administration, and let's hope there's also a movie. With this trailer, the talented Maze has put together this droll compilation of President Biden as Agent 00 in License to Fall.
Where the hell are we? What are we doing?
On this show, I've often covered the dangers of so-called gender-affirming care and trans ideology being pushed on impressionable children. Jazz Jennings is a case that the LGBT lobby have clung to in an effort to push their agenda. The 22-year-old's transition journey was chronicled in a hit reality TV series, I Am Jazz, covering the child's life, family and gender-affirming procedures, including puberty blockers and eventual surgery. But is Jazz Jennings' story really as successful as the transgender activists would want you to believe? Joining me to discuss is Head of Research at LGB Alliance, Malcolm Clark. Malcolm, you wrote a fantastic piece about the tragedy of Jazz Jennings, where you unpack the darker reality behind Jennings' transition journey. In so many ways, it really is a dark story. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, I do a lot of research on the history of the gay movement and the history of the so-called LGBTQ movement. And obviously, like most people, I just accepted the rough outline of the story of Jazz as we've been presented it by the American mainstream media. And then I decided, as I often do, to go back and really analyze what we were told. And so I went back to the original broadcasts with Barbara Walters in 2007 when she went to see a little 4-year-old. And I was just amazed when I watched it to see how Barbara Walters, who was this icon of American journalism, wasn't asking any searching questions and was just accepting everything that Jazz Jennings' rather strange mother in particular, and her parents in general, were saying about, I say her, so it's so easy to get to use the wrong pronouns. I mean, the point is Jazz Jennings is a boy, was a boy, and is a man, but the mainstream media convinced us that this boy was a girl. And when you go back and look at the original footage, you're amazed at how much were being deluded by her parents and how much it seems to me that it may well have been, if not a grift, then something very close to a shared delusion across the family.
Well, I've spoken to trans woman Blair White on a number of occasions, and one of her great lines is a transgender 4-year-old. Yeah, she tells it like it is. But one of her great lines is a transgender 4-year-old is like a vegan cat. We all know who's making the lifestyle decisions. And talking about the parents in this case, they claim she wanted to medically transition from when she was a toddler, from when she was 2 years old. Let's have a look.
I'll never forget one day I was at the computer and Jazz came up to me and she said, "Mom, when is the good fairy going to come with her magic wand and change my penis into a vagina?" And I was really confused. You know, I have this 2-year-old coming up to me and saying, you know, I'm a girl. Like I had a pit inside of my stomach. I'm like, my kid is not normal. I mean, this is not normal.
They took me to the doctor when I was 3 years old, and she held up 2 dolls. One doll was a girl and had girl parts, and one doll was a boy and had boy parts. And she said, "Which do you have right now?" And I pointed to the boy doll. And then she said, "Which do you want?" And I pointed to the girl.
The astonishing thing is I haven't seen that little clip, but I've seen so many different clips where Jazz Jennings, the mother, and Jazz tell so many different versions of this story. For example, the bit you've just played with Jazz saying that the doctor said X, Y, and Z. Well, I've seen interviews with the doctor who says a very different version of it. She, Marilyn Volker, who was the doctor, who was a sex therapist, not even... Marilyn Volker, the idea that you would go to Marilyn Volker to find out if your kid was trans is so ludicrous. But Marilyn Volker says the opposite. She says that it was Jazz who said these specific things. And she says that Jazz said, "I want to have that body," looking at the little girl doll. But now I hear that Jazz says it's the opposite, and it was Marilyn who said that, which is much more believable. You know, who would ask a child, "These are 2 dolls, which doll would you like to be in the future?" I mean, that's ludicrous. And even if I said in my article, if I had been shown dolls of Batman and Superman, and a therapist had said, which superstar would you like to be?" I might have pointed to Superman, but that doesn't mean to say they should attach wings to my body or do things to me. It's so absurd. However, Jazz Jennings also said that she had decided herself that Jazz was born in the wrong body. She looked at the diagnostic, the DSM, the sort of health book that looks at all the different mental health issues, and doctors rely on it, but that's doctors. Jeanette is just, a citizen of South Florida, has no medical background. She decides to look at the DSM and diagnoses for herself that her child is transgender. And then she says, "I just needed someone to confirm it." And so she went to Marilyn Volker. I mean, the story doesn't make any sense at all. And if you were Barbara Walters, if you or I were in the position that Barbara Walters was in 2007, we would have asked them questions. We would have kept our skepticism. That's all that's the responsibility you have to your audience.
Oh, absolutely. And I wonder whether some of that media coverage really just made this path that Jazz was sent on irreversible. There was too much attention. There was too many people cheering for this madness. And when you've got parents like that in the mix. And I just want to play you a clip here of the brutal reality of some of that so-called gender-affirming medical care that Jazz received. Here is the mother again.
But with her, I'm worried about her mental well-being and her dilation. The minute she leaves my house, we have a dilation problem.
That is a concern. When you don't have that watchful eye, they tend to go back to old patterns.
I have woken Jazz out of a dead sleep and taken the dilator and put the lubrication on it and said, "Here, you take this and you put it in your vagina. If not, I will." But Jazz is bad, even when I'm home once a day. I would be so mad if she goes away to college and that thing seals up. I will wring her neck. Can you imagine?
Oh,
Yeah, it's
that
just
vision
chilling, isn't it? I
disturbed
mean,
many people.
it's so chilling. I mean, for a mother to be so glib about the fact that her child has been castrated and to buy into this idea that the neo-vagina will need to be continually dilated, and then to imagine doing it herself. I mean, it is so bizarre. It's so gothic, and yet it's extraordinary that this reality show in particular, but the American media has normalized something that 20 years ago, if you were talking about a teenager and their mother, his mother was going to use something like basically a sex toy, but it's the same sort of device to keep the wound open. I mean, people would have thought this is some sort of horrific scenario, a science fiction scenario, and yet we're now told this is normal and that we're in fact to celebrate it.
Oh, and one can only hope that perhaps 10, 20 years from now, people will look back at this period with absolute shock and disgust, and then we've moved along from this current phenomenon, because Jazz may have been one of the very first high-profile transitions, but in the TikTok age, there are now thousands of parents and youngsters who are documenting their transition journeys online. So this problem, I think, is only going to get bigger before, hopefully, there is some correction. Malcolm Clark, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Peter.
Joining me now is the senior editor-at-large at Newsweek, Josh Hammer. Josh, we've got a lot to discuss today, including Novak Djokovic's triumph in the US Open. But let's start with a great piece you wrote for Newsweek outlining the lie behind President Joe Biden's economic agenda, dubbed Bidenomics. This piece is really fantastic because it talks about how Bidenomics is seeking to gaslight the nation. You detail how Joe Biden is clearly making the economy front and centre of his 2024 campaign. He's released this ad recently.
They said millions would lose their jobs and the economy would collapse. But this president refused to let that happen. Instead, he got to work, fixing supply chains, fighting corporate greed, passing laws to lower the cost of medicine, cut utility bills, and make us more energy independent.
He talks there also about securing energy independence and fixing supply chains. I mean, does he think the entire country is suffering from some sort of collective amnesia?
Well, it's kind of ironic, Rita, because that probably is what the very senile commander-in-chief here is suffering on a daily basis. And you might think that he is kind of wish casting that the electorate is suffering the same thing, because that's probably the only way that this man is in good chance, or good standing, I should say, to be reelected next fall. Now, when it comes to this Bidenomics pitch, which he's very clearly making the center of his campaign, one of two things could be true. One is, the first possibility is that the economy has actually been good. The second possibility is that everything else has actually been so catastrophically terrible that he has no choice but to try to make things up and choose to run on one of the less bad options. And I think that it is easily the latter. If you look at the southern border in the United States, it is the worst it's ever been. There are countless untold migrants flooding across the border. You look at crime and homelessness and drugs in inner city America, the absolute worst has ever been the metastasis of Soros prosecutors all across major blue American urban enclaves. Talk about the world stage, the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, this terrible ransom deal with Iran, the Chinese Communist Party getting ever closer to what looks like a possible full-scale invasion of Taiwan. He's falling asleep in Hanoi, Vietnam. He's making a fool of himself at the G20 with India. I mean, everywhere he's messing up, so he has no choice but to try to make economics the centerpiece of his campaign. The problem, Rita, as I laid out in that column, is that the data show a very different side of the story. So in 2022, the United States formally entered a recession. We had back-to-back quarters of negative GDP growth. Now, Joe Biden's henchman, Brian Deese, his chief economist, and Karine Jean-Pierre, the dim-witted White House press secretary, they tried to redefine in real time what a recession is. But last I checked, the universally accepted definition of what an economic recession is consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. Furthermore, in the summer of 2022, inflation reached the absolute worst it has been since the infamous stagflation of Jimmy Carter. It reached 9.1% annualized at its absolute highest basis. It's still, by the way, way above what the Federal Reserve targets, which is 2%. It's about 3.5% to 4% now. The median mortgage payment for an American trying to get a home is literally double what it was just 3 years ago in 2020. And I could go on and on there, but just in that ad alone, and I'll finish with this thought. I mean, he's talking there on that ad about energy independence and supply chains. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline on day one of his presidency. He canceled millions of acres of oil and natural gas leases in northern Alaska on the very first day of his presidency. This president has been forced to grovel around the world to rogue regimes like Venezuela and Iran to produce more oil because we're not producing any of the oil that we are so blessed in this country to actually live upon. Supply chains, I mean, again, are you kidding me? In 2021, around Christmas time, little kids weren't getting their Christmas presents because there was an infamous supply chain crisis. So it's a total lie, soup to nuts. It's pure gaslighting, and I do not think it's going to work.
Now let's go to Chris Rufo, who has been enormously effective in actually delivering results, in exposing and in some cases putting a stop to the toxic doctrines of critical race theory and gender theory and other neo-Marxist projects, particularly in places like Florida. But now he has been named in a civil rights complaint because he apparently misgendered an academic who used ze pronouns, ze. Yes, the Biden administration's Department of Education has opened an investigation into the New College of Florida, where Rufo is a member of the Board of Trustees. I mean, this is an example of the Biden administration really going after individuals who are fighting back against this agenda, whether it's someone like Chris Rufo, whether it's Elon Musk, who's getting some legal action at the moment, or whether it's the former president, Donald Trump.
So this is totally preposterous. I mean, it is facially absurd. I mean, no one should even take this seriously. You know, look, Rita, I have the privilege of knowing Chris personally. I've known him for a few years now. He is a wonderful person. He frankly is just a good human being, which despite his, what his detractors say about him, I mean, they can't take away from the fact that he's a wonderful husband and father and all of that. But the reason that the Biden administration is targeting him here, Rita, is very simple, is that Chris Rufo has emerged over the past few years as hands down one of the most effective right-wing activists in the United States of America. Yeah. He is possibly second to none when it comes to his skill at actually having sources on the inside, whether it is radical gender ideology of these so-called gender-affirming care clinics, whether it is these DEI bureaucracies that are instilling anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-white sentiment all throughout corporate America, whether it is critical race theory, his bread and butter topic. So this is a very, very frank, straightforward and unambiguous use of crass political power of the Biden administration wielding power to try to punish its enemies within the arguable confines of the rule of law. I mean, right now they're just opening an Office of Civil Rights investigation within the Department of Education. We'll see if it amounts to anything concrete. I hate to say, I suspect it probably will. But whether it's Chris Rufo, whether it's Governor DeSantis, who appointed Chris to the Board of Trustees there at New College of Florida, Biden administration, time and time again, going back really to its first year in office, the year 2021, they have repeatedly shown that they are not just willing and able, but they are actually eager. They are frothing at the mouth. They are zealous in their desire to prosecute their enemies by any means necessary. And it really ought to be a wake-up call, frankly, for folks on our side as to what we are up against.
That's it. And you've got to fight in the same manner. I know a lot of conservatives find that a little bit distasteful that, you don't want to sink to those lows, but they're fighting a different game and they're playing by their own rules. And if you want to be polite about it, you're going to lose. Now, Josh, where you are right now, it's September 11 in America. In Australia, we've already gone to September 12, but I was reflecting yesterday on how much America has changed since that attack and how the magnitude of that awful day has been minimised in many ways. I mean, we've got the Vice President and others comparing January 6 riots to this coordinated terrorist attack that killed thousands.
Look, Rita, for me personally, I grew up in the New York area. I grew up in a town about 25 miles north of New York City, actually right on the Hudson River. And one of my really kind of coming to adulthood moments personally was being right there on the Hudson River on September 11, 2001, looking down the river and seeing the physical smoke from the towers. I mean, that was really kind of my impetus to start following current events, to start following politics, to develop kind of really kind of intellectual opinions in general. I mean, because once you see that level of visceral, shocking, unambiguous evil in the world, you are kind of immediately radicalized into being something of a conservative. But I guess that's kind of a talk for another day. The point is, having grown up there and lived there in New York, I literally remember the candlelight vigils, trying to comfort people who lost their lives. 3,000 Americans slain, the absolute worst terrorist attack in the history of the country. And Kamala Harris is trying to compare that to what? To Ashley Babbitt. And there was one Capitol Hill police officer who died of an unrelated cause a day or two after that. I mean, it's just disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting, but it's actually very telling, Rita, and I'll tell you why. You know, for years after 9/11, you saw regimes of both political parties, initially the Bush administration and then later the Obama administration, try to weaponize the surveillance state and the intelligence community apparatus against mostly foreign enemies. Then we saw it kind of then taken to be domestic enemies during the Trump campaign in 2016 with the FISA warrant on Carter Page and all of that. But what we now see happening with the persecution of the January 6th political prisoners, and this is really not so subtly, I think, what Kamala Harris is trying to do here. She's trying to take that same mentality of terrorism. You know, as George W. Bush said, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. She's implicitly, really not so implicitly, pretty explicitly actually trying to make that same comparison to January 6th and basically saying if you are an enemy of our regime, if you are MAGA, if you are Trump, if you are vaguely right of center, then you are an enemy and you should be subject to the exact same sort of surveillance and who knows what else, political or legal persecution, as the United States engaged in for years and years after 9/11. It's a profoundly dangerous sentiment. I think back to Joe Biden's speech in Philadelphia around Labor Day, I think it was last September, just about a year ago or so, where he had this infamously polarizing speech. They don't care about unifying Americans, Rita. They're trying to make an enemy of all of us on the right.
Oh, yes, I remember that speech with the red background. It was very sinister indeed. Before I let you go, yesterday we saw the best player in the world, Novak Djokovic, triumph in the US Open. Let's have a quick look.
24 and counting. 24 and he still wants more. That's who he is.
But we can't forget, Josh, the way this man was treated by American authorities and right here in Australia. Here we locked him up in detention and then threw him out of the country. He's been robbed of the chance to win multiple Grand Slam events due to this COVID-era madness where he's been banned from competing because of his vaccination status. Tell me about the reaction to him and the fact that Moderna was a major sponsor for that event.
You know, it's funny. I'm actually a lifelong tennis fan, so I watched the entire match. I watched a lot of this whole U.S. Open tournament, and I was watching it the other day, and my fiance walked in, and she was looking at the sponsors in the arena, and she had the same reaction. She saw Moderna, and my fiance, who's very opposed to the COVID vaccination regime, she was like, are you kidding me? Moderna is a sponsor of the U.S. Open? It really is bitterly ironic, right, that Moderna paid to sponsor a tournament that Novak Djokovic managed to win in prolific fashion. But ultimately, when all is said and done for Novak Djokovic's career, for Rafael Nadal's career, when we ultimately have that discussion as to who was the greatest tennis player of all time, was it Novak Djokovic? Was it Rafael Nadal? Was it Roger Federer? Was it perhaps someone else? We're going to have a bit of an asterisk there and then talk about the fact that you're right. Novak Djokovic has been deprived of the opportunity to win multiple majors while he is still at the absolute peak, arguably the peak of all peaks, frankly, even though he's 36 years old or so, at the absolute peak of his career. He's been totally robbed of that opportunity. It's really terrible. Credit to Djokovic where credit is due. I mean, he hasn't made a huge fuss about it. He's got a very kind of work-minded guy, just go about, do your job. But at some point, you would like to think that the U.S. Tennis Association and its Aussie equivalent might give this man an apology. I fear that they probably will not do so, though.
Well, he definitely deserves an apology. I can tell you there's been a lot of rewriting of history here in Australia. A lot of the journalists who were absolutely vicious in their reporting on Novak. When he came here and won, they were all his biggest fans. It was all, forgotten the way they really, I think, misrepresented what happened during that time. Josh Hammer, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Rita.
Joining me now to give us the latest on the Royals is commentator and host of the To Die For Daily podcast, Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, Prince Harry and Meghan's biographer, Omid Scobie, is reportedly devoting an entire chapter to Prince William in a new royal tell-all titled Endgame, Inside the Royal Family and the Monarchy's Fight for Survival. The Sussex's unofficial spokesperson, who published a sneak peek of the chapter headings, warns the book will reveal moments the royal family should be ashamed of. Kinsey, are Harry and Meghan trying to burn whatever bridges remain with Prince William and, frankly, the rest of the royal family?
I mean, professionally, I feel that way about Omid Scobie. It's like he's realizing that he hitched his wagon to two people that just are never going to find their way back. So he's going to burn bridges as well. You're right that the title is Gloves on Prince William, Heir to the Throne. And what's really scary, Rita, is it comes right below the title Race and the Royals, Institutional Bigotry and Denial. And so it does hint that perhaps he's going to name that alleged royal racist, which I don't know if you remember Harry denying that they ever accused a member of the royal family of being racist. He said, what was it? He said it was, I don't even remember the funky term he used at the time, but it was unconscious bias. I mean, the silliness of it all. But it does seem like go for Prince William's throat. And if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on Prince William.
Well, they have handled this very well, and it is not an even fight because one side can go and do all these podcasts and have their spokespeople and do these tell-alls, but the royals can't. They can't hit back. They can't say, well, actually, Meghan did this and then Harry did that, and this is why they've fallen out. Now, the Sussexes do appear to be polishing up their Hollywood credentials, though. We saw footage of Meghan partying the night away with the Hollywood A-list, the likes of the Kardashians. Lizzo was there, Katy Perry. This was at a Beyonce concert. This was a bit of a highlight, you would have to say, for Meghan, because this is the crowd she wants to be a part of.
Rita, Meghan loves that headline, but is that a legitimate headline when we did see Jeff Bezos in the same space? We did see Kim Kardashian in the same space, but and all of those people taking photos, taking selfies, and Meghan gets a picture with Kelly Rowland. I mean, when I think of Kelly Rowland, I think of her in the Nelly video, on messing with some Microsoft Excel spreadsheet over a text message. I don't even think of Destiny's Child. She didn't necessarily get a picture with an A-lister, if you know what I'm saying. I think these are headlines that Meghan is instigating because she's trying to fight back conversations that you and I have personally had about Hollywood distancing themselves from Harry and Meghan because they are toxic and they are troublemakers.
Well, there are reports also that she may emulate the Kardashians. Meghan may become an Instagram influencer. She's already tried to emulate them, I guess, with that documentary series for Netflix, that god-awful boring thing that really was a reality series. It was just a boring one. Can you see that in her future where she becomes an influencer who gets a fee per post or has some sort of a website like a Gwyneth Paltrow, a lifestyle type of website? Because the Netflix and Spotify deals don't seem to be working out. The content just isn't there to justify those deals continuing.
No, I absolutely think you're right. And Meghan needs some of that Kardashian celebrity, some of that shine, which is why I'm predicting right here and right now to you and only you that a Kim Kardashian, Meghan Markle collaboration is on the horizon. Recent polling says Meghan is at her lowest in the States, -2. She's never been that low in America. I think people think she's vapid. And, you know, we are still seeing Harry pursue charity and philanthropy while Meghan is grinding and bumping to Beyonce. So I do think that she's going to pursue that celebrity lifestyle. And how easy is it to send a tweet? Obviously, her work ethic is lacking. From what Spotify specifically told us, it's easy to send a tweet and get $5,000 for saying you like a lip gloss.
Well, yeah, that would be a lot simpler than coming up with content for a podcast. Now, Meghan has been pictured by the paparazzi whizzing around in her Range Rover while Harry is away in Germany to promote their Invictus Games. Now, some uncharitable souls have suggested here that this is Meghan's way of getting some of that spotlight because she doesn't like it when it's just Harry getting the attention. Surely that's not the case. Surely, Kinsey.
Sure. No, she would never do such a thing. No, I mean, I do think that she was a working member of the royal family long enough to know that she should be laying low right now for Prince Harry to have the spotlight. Rita, this is the only legitimate project that Prince Harry has, the Invictus Games, the only thing that from start to finish is considered a success that people admire. And to be like, yeah, I think I'm going to run through the In-N-Out drive-through and have someone conveniently take a picture of me from inside the restaurant to magically snap me in the drive-through window. It's a little off. It makes you wonder if there's any method to the madness, because all eyes should be on Harry, because I just think that right now their brand is a mess, and it's the one thing they've got going for them that makes sense.
Now, this story raised a few eyebrows last week. Amid the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death, reports emerged of how Meghan tried to insert herself by the monarch's bedside in her final hours, despite the palace forbidding it. The Telly reports friends of the Prince of Wales revealed before the anniversary how the Duke and Duchess of Sussex attempted to bypass the palace's official decision over who was welcome to be by the Queen's deathbed in her final hours. It was insane, a Wales insider said. They had just spent 2 years slagging off the entire family and calling them racist. Harry had completely betrayed William, and he was holding the memoir and the Netflix series over them as well. Wow, that really gives an insight into some of the dynamics in the family at that fraught time.
Yes, here in the States, we call that delusional. The fact that you think you would be welcome at the Queen's bedside as she is passing away. They even go as far as to claim that Harry and Meghan's press team released the fact that Meghan would be attending to force the royals' hand. That's not the way it works. You do not force these people's hands at such a difficult point in time in history. And not to, focus on the past, but don't forget Katie Nichols reported at the time that the Queen had reached out to them in her dying days and asked to spend time with them, and they rejected her. So the idea that they're going to jump on a plane and make sure they're packed going to spend the Queen's last moments with her, get over yourself. No, thank you. You are not welcome.
Now, finally, President Donald Trump has said that he'd like to debate Meghan Markle on live radio. Let's have a listen.
If you were to sit down with the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry, they don't like you much. Would you do that for the ratings?
Well, I don't know that they don't like me. I said that I don't think they're very appropriate, what they're saying, what they're doing.
But, I mean, that would get ratings, wouldn't it?
Oh, if you want to set it up, let's set it up. Let's go do something. I'd love to debate her. I would love it.
You know what? I'll be in on that. That would be something where the ratings would be sky high. Meghan versus Trump. Can we make it happen, Kinsey? How can we make it happen? We keep hearing Meghan has political ambitions, and what better way to get your credentials than to go head to head with Donald Trump, the #1 enemy of the Democrats?
You're right. I was just thinking you and I would be front row with our popcorn ready. You know, and Meghan, yes. I don't know if you have noticed, but whenever she's accepting an award, because really that's, unless she's filming a reality show, she's accepting an award. And that's the only time we hear her talk. She talks in these like very generic sound bites. Even this idea of her going this entertainment route, the lead to love, live, laugh, love. She talks in like things you'd find on a bathroom mat in one of those discount stores. You know, she doesn't ever really expand on anything and talk and show us what she's truly about. It's just she has these buzzwords and these buzz causes that she attaches herself to. So Trump would destroy her. Trump is vicious. He's a lot smarter than she is. I mean, look at the brand he's built for himself. And look at the brand the royal family gave her that she's managed to destroy. So I think it would be must-see TV. And you and I, right there, front row, enjoying our popcorn.
I would be there even if it was just audio, if it was a radio debate, but if you could televise it, oh my gosh. But you're so right, and I think what would be the most thrilling bit is the nickname he's going to give her, because he's expert at that. His nicknames stick. He very rarely gets it wrong. And we call them the Ginger and the Whinger, and he'll blow that out of the park. He'll come up with something that you'll go, genius. Obvious, but genius. Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.